Today, we are going to conclude our course by looking at the pluralistic nature of American religion. Up until the 20th century, the dominant strands of American religious life have been different forms of Christianity, dominated by Protestantism, but with a massive surge of notions of Catholicism in the 19th and 20th century. There are other, both Christian and non Christian religious movements that we haven't spent much time talking about or addressing. We briefly touched on Eastern Orthodoxy and Judaism, and we'll talk a little bit more about them today too. But a large part of the focus of this class is to look at the breadth of religious experience that happened in America. A good portion of this happened in the 20th century, and so it's just natural that it would kind of fit in here at the end, though many of these movements have roots much earlier than the state. The motto of America is E pluribus unum, out of many, one. Yet a large portion of American religious life has shown the tension which exists between being many and coming together to form a single unit. The pluralism of religion, even when restricted to different Christian bodies, did not always show a go along to get along sort of attitude. Throughout the 18th and most of the 19th century, it was vehemently anti-Catholic was the default sort of position for most of the Protestant Americans that existed. We saw with the acquisition of Alaska the federally subsidized anti-Orthodox stance of the country, even though the treaty concerning the sale of the country, the land of Alaska, specifically outlined the protection of Orthodox Christians therein. Many of these attitudes are officially shunned but still exist today. Conversely, secularism is its own form of religion by many respects, which seeks to suppress all religious voices, not just those which disagree with one another. So, how can we actually find unity? Or is the motto of America aspirational rather than descriptive? How should we approach belief systems that are radically different than those represented earlier in American history? Should the differences simply be ignored? And what place does assimilation have, or should it have, when we're talking about religious ideas and movements in America? In Chicago of 1893, we witnessed the first real attempt, as it were, to try to discuss the pluralism of religious voices that existed not only in America but worldwide in a way that was at least an attempt to be more authentic. This was the World Parliament of Religion. It was really this event that, on a first time and on a massive scale, Americans saw and heard about religions of the world from actual devotees of those religions. Primarily, the voices that kind of enthralled most people were Buddhist and Hindu and Baha'i representatives, which broke down some of the distorting stereotypes and easy dismissals that existed from different testimonies that people would have with little partial voices here and there. The whole event was the brainchild of a Congregationalist by the name of John Henry Barrows. The Parliament provided not only a hearing for these Asian religions, but also a common platform for the rival siblings of massive American religious groups found within Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Parliament preached a sort of comforting universalism. This is oftentimes the sort of thing that people might criticize with it. There was this hope or desire, or at least attempt by Barrows and others to try to show a sort of common core that existed for all of the religions of the world and how they can all find an expression in American religious life. The thought was to dismiss overall the differences that existed. The assurance notwithstanding, the World Parliament also provided some sort of incontrovertible evidence of the direction of the United States and which way it was going and what we can see happening in the 20th century. Religious nations, of course, but whether to embrace or assimilate or how to deal with notions of fear or to repudiate different ideas all remained a very wide open question in the 19th century. The World Parliament of Religions in 1893 gives us this opportunity to come together, or at least see what is going to be happening over the 20th century before it happens. The largest non-Christian religious body in the United States historically is Judaism. According to Pew's 2024 Religious Landscape Survey, 2% of Americans identify themselves as Jewish. While this number has fluctuated from the beginning of the country, Jews have traditionally been the largest minority, though never more than about 2.5% of the total population. The first Jews to arrive in America were actually Sephardic Jews in 1654. They came to America from Brazil, but they didn't consist of any large numbers, so they didn't produce a lot of effects. The vast majority of Jews who came to America are Ashkenazi Jews, who formed their own synagogue in 1802 in Philadelphia. When the country was founded, there were 5 synagogues or Jewish congregations. In 1848, there were less than 50. Judaism largely grew in the country as a result of waves of immigrants from Europe, primarily Germany and Russia. The German Jews were more liberal, while the Russian Jews are generally understood as being more conservative. The large wave of Eastern European Jews, more than 500,000, came over to America in a very short period of time between 1800 and 1900. The estimated population of Jews in America in 1880 was roughly 250,000. The German Jews were largely more liberal and attempted to integrate themselves into American life. Most Reform Jews emerged from the attempt to simplify synagogue worship and make it more appealing to Jews who wanted to be both American and modern, while still retaining their notion of being Jewish. For these Jews, the synagogue was a communal institution that included both religious and civic importance. Most Reform synagogues were congregational in structure and can vary from a wide degree from one to another. The first major Reform synagogue was built in 1824 in Charleston, South Carolina. Other Reform synagogues emerged shortly thereafter. In 1842, we have the Har Sinai being built in Baltimore, and the Emmanuel was built in New York the following year. In 1843, the Society of Friends of Reform was organized. This lays out the basic tenets of what Reform Judaism believes and practices in America. They taught that Judaism had the possibility of unlimited development. Additionally, they stated that the Talmud, the collections of basic teachings for Judaism from about the year 500, possessed no authority from either a doctrinal or practical standpoint. They also stated that the Messiah, who is to be leading the Israelites back to the land of Palestine, is neither expected nor even desired by them. Finally, and importantly, they stated that they know no fatherland except that which they belong to by birth and by citizenship. In other words, we're Americans. We don't want to go back to Palestine. We're not Europeans. We're not going to be wrapped up with the effects of the old world. We want to be modern and believe things of the modern era, and everything before that can kind of go away. The leader of this early Reform Judaism is Isaac Weiss. Weiss believed that Judaism should free itself from all ancient legislation and ethnic limitations. This was emphasized again in 1885 with what's known as the Pittsburgh Platform, which states that Reform Judaism rejects all aspects of Jewish orthodoxy which are not adapted to the views and habits of modern civilization. It states, quote, "We hold that all such Mosaic and rabbinical laws as regulated diet, priestly purity, and dress originated in ages and under the influence of ideas altogether foreign to our present mental and spiritual state." Additionally, it stated, "We recognize Judaism as a progressive religion, ever striving to be in accord with the postulates of reason." To this end, in the late 20th century, Reform Judaism also ordained women. In 1972, Rabbi Sally Priestland was the first female rabbi ordained. Unfortunate for Reform Judaism, when other branches of Judaism emerged in America, the traditional structure began to wane. Under the leadership of Cyrus Adler, of the Jewish Theological Seminary, it was reinvigorated, and a new crop of seminarians were sent out to try to help civilize, in their words, the Eastern European Jews, and to provide them with a modern English-speaking rabbis, hoping to modernize them as well. In 1955, this modernization made its way to the point that the Central Policy Committee ruled that traditional customs could not be observed, including things like a bar mitzvah and wedding ceremonies, because a leading rabbi explained in 1959, many Jews seek comfort in the nostalgia of a romanticized Jewish past which never existed. We cannot lead our people forward by stumbling backward. Eventually, Arthur Cohen noted in 1962 that the American tradition and the American environment made it possible for the Jew to become an American without ceasing to be a Jew. With that in mind, and through the developments of the 60s and 70s, the ruling authority ended up reversing its 1955 stance in 1979. It now stated that such customs could now be observed if a new generation finds them meaningful and useful in their practice of Judaism. Conservative Judaism emerged in America during the late 19th century, in part because of an increasing liberalization of Reform Judaism. Sparked by an 1883 banquet which honored the first graduates of Hebrew Union College, Sabbatio Morris led a group of disaffected Reform Jews out of the banquet. The main reason is that the banquet honoring these graduates served shrimp, contrary to the kosher dietary restrictions. Morris founded the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York as an institution to counter the liberal practices that he saw at Hebrew Union. Generally, conservative Jews do not hold to the importance of a Jewish political state, but place much more of an emphasis on historic and religious aspects of Judaism, doctrinally trying to preserve some of the aspects that Reform Judaism says was not important, but finding themselves more in the middle when we're comparing them to the Orthodox. Conservative synagogues did not really prosper in America until after World War II, at which point conservative Jews are traditionally understood as a branch of more economic success, kind of focusing in on business in a way that was far more successful than we would find within the other branches of Judaism. Orthodox Jews were Jews that largely came from Eastern Europe following the 1882 Russian decree, which had in its effect to reduce the number of Jews in Russia. Russia was attempting to wrestle with the social issues which resulted from the emancipation of the serfs in the 1860s, as well as the large problem of property confiscation through mortgages, money lending, and the growing issue of alcoholism, which was understood from the Russian perspective as coming to Russia following the acquisition of Polish territory and the large number of Jews in Poland who made their way into Russia, which had not existed to any large degree previous to this point. For the Jews who had now lived in this Russian territory, life became rather difficult, and many chose to leave and come to America, which is in part what Russia had wanted. They did not believe or want to abandon their cultural life or to assimilate into the new American world, but rather they thought it was just necessary for America and American Jews to change and hold on to the tradition instead of this notion of modernization. This branch of Judaism holds strong to traditional beliefs in Sabbath and mitzvot, and this is also why for many Orthodox Jews, they have a sort of old world feeling about them. Additionally, they were rather scandalized when they got here by the practices of Reform Judaism and weren't going to just enter into Reform synagogue life. If the conservative Jews are viewed as a branch of success, the Orthodox Jews largely are not. Typically, they're more insular, which is challenging to economic growth and possibilities. They generally will not send their kids to universities and have large families. As such, they're not as engaged in the broader economic possibilities of America, even though they have their own small shops and businesses, most of which sell and cater to other Orthodox Jews. The most successful of Orthodox Jews are those who are involved in trade outside of just Jewish communities, particularly in the diamond trade. By 1920, 80% of Jews, or their families in America, were from Eastern Europe. Yet, because of the work of Cyrus Adler, most were Reform and not Orthodox. Even still, there were more Jews who were not formally affiliated with any synagogue whatsoever. One study taken in 1935 pointed out that 75% of the Jewish youth aged 15 to 25 did not attend any religious service over the previous year. This study is not an outlier. It's actually rather much in line with every other study. Mordecai Kaplan of Jewish Theological Seminary had a different approach to reaching the youth. His was to focus on Jewishness. His approach was to focus less on religious aspects of what it is to be a Jew and more on cultural practices. In his work of Judaism and Civilization, published in 1834, he pointed out that Jews had a unique culture and that even those non-religious Jews could be culturally Jewish and embrace that. This seemed to find a sort of harmony within tradition and modernity and reintegrated itself into conservative Judaism, though often it's identified as a sub-branch called Reconstructionism. Of a Jewish civilization fueled the growth of Zionism. Zionism has its origins in a number of different movements that sought the creation of a Jewish state, largely since the Cognate of Khazaria collapsed. The Khazars are a Turkic people located in the Volga-Caucasus region, converted to Judaism in the 9th century. The Cognate ended in 965 when Stanislav I, the Grand Prince of Kiev, conquered them. It was Stanislav's son, Vladimir, who then converted the Rus to Orthodox Christianity and dismissed the Jewish envoys to Kiev since they lacked a homeland. It must have meant that God didn't favor them in Vladimir's estimation. The result for Judaism was that there was no Jewish country, and many Jews agreed that until there was a homeland, it would show that God did not favor the Jews. Many Khazar Jews migrated to Europe following the collapse, some as far away as Spain, where they undoubtedly inspired Sephardic Judaism, as well as those in Germany they impacted and intermarried with a number of Ashkenazi Jews. Some have gone so far as to say that the Ashkenazi themselves, as an entire body, are descendants of the Khazars, though this view is visited by both skeptics and with a certain degree of caution. Some Jews have supported this hypothesis, while others reject it. What is certain is that the idea of a Jewish homeland being an important part of the Jewish identity in both the Middle Ages and with the rise of nationalism in the 17th through 20th century gained serious traction. Zionism was later defined by Theodor Herzl, 1860 to 1914, in his pamphlet The Jewish State, published in 1896. According to Herzl, the only salvation for the Jews was a national rebirth, which necessitated a homeland, and the preference was not a Khazarian state, but a Palestinian one. The First World Zionist Congress was held in Basel, Switzerland in 1897. In 1912, Henrietta Solz founded the Women's Zionist Organization of America. Not every Zionist is a religious Jew, many of which are ethnically Jewish. Neither was Zionism something that gained massive support early on within all types of Judaism. Many conservative Jews opposed this idea outright. More Reform Jews were actually rather hostile to it, saying, "We're Americans, we don't want to go anywhere else." Only among the Orthodox Jews was Zionism embraced to any degree early on. After World War II, this changed, and more Reform Jews, even in America, supported the creation of a Jewish state. The creation of the State of Israel in 1948 had mixed results among American Jews. Many Jews believed that this was the restoration and would allow for a rebirth of Judaism and bring the Messiah, while others identify it as merely another secular state. In 1848, American Jews financially supported a settlement in Palestine, and this grew the belief and settlement of the modern state of Israel. Following World War II, Jews increased their engagement in religious life as well. Reform Judaism saw growth from 50,000 families in 1937 to 255,000 families engaged in the synagogue life. Conservative Jews went from 75,000 to 200,000 families. Orthodox Judaism was the only group to see a decrease from the 200,000 families in 1937, though they did found Yeshiva College during this time period. Overall, Judaism saw an increase not only in families tied with the synagogue, but attendance rates moved from 18% in 1947 to 31% in 1955. The Jews, including Reform, growing up in and after the 90s, appear to have an affinity for many of the older cultural practices, including speaking Hebrew and keeping kosher. Even the mitzvah ritual bath following menstruation has been spread among some Reform women. In 2004, Kosher Today magazine reported that the U.S. kosher market had grown 15% annually for each of the last 8 years. And in 1990, 61% of those aged 18 to 29 personally fasted on Yom Kippur, compared to only 44% of those who were over age 50. In the 1970s, a segment of Jews got wrapped up in what's known as the Jesus movement, beginning a new movement called the Jews for Jesus. While initially it was a slogan, in 1972 it grew into a distinct church founded by Moshe Rosen, who told his fellow Jews that Jesus was the Messiah for the Jews. Largely, Jews for Jesus is a Protestant church, but other Jewish conversions also took place from this, including James Bernstein, who converted and eventually became an Orthodox Christian priest. His story is shared in his book, Surprised by Christ: My Journey from Judaism to Orthodox Christianity. The Jesus movement began in the late 60s, building on much of the same disaffection that fueled the hippies. In 1967, Ted Weiss established a coffee house called The Living Room in the Haight-Ashbury district of San Francisco. The Living Room became a commune called the House of Acts. Then, Lonnie Frisbee founded a similar commune in Southern California. Frisbee is often identified as a hippie evangelist. He co-founded or was an inspirational figure in the House of Miracles commune and other major evangelical denominations, including Chuck Smith's Calvary Chapel, Ken Gulkson's Vineyard Movement, and Greg Laurie's Harvest Church. Not all groups with the Jesus movement had Frisbee, though, as a key figure. Many movements were rather diverse and a great number of views as well. What they all shared in common was an emphasis on a, quote, simple gospel. That is, they took the evangelical message of understanding the Bible to be more important than any scholarly questions than the neoliberal or neo-orthodox were all arguing about. Overall, they had a bias against organized Christianity. They also tended to believe that they were living in the end times, and some had a notion of Pentecostal gifts added on to this, even if they did not accept notions of accepting tongues, which some of the groups did. Many of the Jesus movement groups also had a communal living arrangement and used the music and language of the youth culture in the 60s and 70s. In other words, they were just as countercultural as the hippies, but their preferred drug was Jesus and not all of the others. The 20th century saw both immigration laws and immigration trends changing. In 1960, about 75% of all foreign-born residents were born in Europe. By 2000, that number dropped to 15%. 26% were from Asia and 51% in the year 2000 came from Latin America. Along with the change of immigration came a change of religion of the immigrant, and therefore the bringing of world religions into America. This is significant when we look at the beliefs that come along with immigrants from East Asia. In the 1980s, immigration laws changed again, and a new wave of Asian immigrants coming from China, Taiwan, and Korea, as well as India, all came to America. As of 2004, there were about 2 million Muslims and another 2 million Buddhists and 1 million Hindus. That meant that 1.7% of the United States population at that time would have been Muslim, Buddhist, or Hindu, 0.68 belonging to either Muslim or Buddhist. According to Pew, as of 2024, 7% of Americans held a religion other than Christianity. 2% were Jewish, while Muslim, Buddhist, and Hindus, and all others, including New Age and Wicca, had about 1%. With that said, immigration is only one factor for the growth of looking at East Asian religions. While many of these countries are not Christian, a disproportionate number of Christians immigrate also, and many of the immigrants either convert to Christianity once they arrive, or, in large numbers, become nothing. Maybe ethnically they would tie themselves in and answer a question of, I'm Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu or whatever, but not necessarily that they were practicing of any sorts. One example is South Korea. South Korea is roughly 25% Christian, but a study of the Chicago Koreans found that 52% were affiliated with Christian churches in America before immigrating, and about another half of that number joined a Christian church once they arrived. Even when immigrant churches don't convert, they usually adopt a sort of congregationalist structure similar to non-denominational Protestant churches in America, something that would have been foreign in their original country of origin. Buddhism grew on the west coast of America initially due to Chinese immigrants in the 19th century. The first Buddhists in America arrived around 1820, but more arrived after the California Gold Rush. In 1853, less than a decade after the gold rush, the first Buddhist temple of America was built in San Francisco by the C. Yap Company, the Chinese-American fraternal organization. Like many immigrant churches, the temple was not a purely religious building, but served as a Chinese cultural center and contained a sort of synthetic elements, including both Chinese religious beliefs as well as Buddhist beliefs and all sorts of other notions found within the temple. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 limited the number of Chinese and their presence in the West, but large-scale immigration from Japan and Korea began in the 1880s. Therefore, the wave of Buddhists coming from East Asia did not really abate too much. It's just what type of Buddhists were coming. At one point Chinese, and now Korean and Japanese. The first Japanese Buddhist temple was built in Hawaii in 1896, 2 years before America annexed Hawaii. With the annexation of Hawaii in 1898, Buddhism continued to have an American presence. Once in America, Buddhists created their own parallel organizations to what was already happening in America. One key example that's easy to see was the founding of the Young Men's Buddhist Association in 1898. By the end of the 19th century, there were roughly 400 Chinese and Japanese cultural centers, which often contained at least some elements of Buddhism and also served as Buddhist temples. Most of them spread along the west coast. It should be noted that the first dedicated Buddhist temple, built in the continental United States, was not constructed until 1899, though. Buddhism was the most mission-minded of the Asian religions traditions in the 20th century. D.T. Suzuki moved from Japan to LaSalle, Illinois in 1897 and was a leading translator of Zen Buddhism to the English-speaking world. The Reverend Soryu Kagi was dispatched from Japan to be the first Buddhist missionary in Hawaii. The first prominent American to convert to Buddhism was Henry Steele Olcott. Olcott was one of the early members of the Theosophical Society. Olcott, along with many of his other believers in the Theosophical Society, were okay with maintaining beliefs of both sets, both those that existed within the society and Buddhist notions, believing them to be harmonious. In 1914, the Buddhist Mission of North America was officially founded by several Japanese Buddhist congregations under the leadership of Koyu Uchida. By the 1920s, programs were created in English to train up English-speaking priests and to bring American-born Japanese and other American converts. Nearly all of the converts at this stage of Buddhism in America were members of the social elite in America, though. Evangelical Buddhism really arrived later, especially with Soka Gakkai. Soka Gakkai literally means Establishing Value Education Society, and it was founded in Japan in 1930. It is likely the most successful new religious movement in Japan following World War II, though obviously with the date of 1930, it existed prior to the war as well. The U.S. branch of Soka Gakkai opened in 1960, and their leader took the name George M. Williams to show solidarity with America, and under his leadership it became the largest Buddhist organization in America. Many American celebrities, primarily actors and actresses, also joined the movement. Unlike other forms of Buddhism that focused on various meditative practices, Soka Gakkai's primary vehicle for understanding enlightenment in Buddhist principles is through the use of chanting. They also do not have any formal priests. Another trend in evangelical Buddhism recently is a movement called engaged Buddhism. This is not to say that other forms of Buddhism are not engaged, but that this movement specifically attempts to apply Buddhist values to larger social problems. For example, engaged Buddhists speak out against the Vietnam War, and others have addressed environmental concerns as well. The largest of the engaged Buddhists was the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, which was founded in 1978, and also the Zen Peacemaker Order, founded in 1996. Other Buddhist movements have also attracted a large number of followers in the 19th and 20th century, primarily Zen and Tibetan Buddhism. Zen Buddhism was the first import Buddhist movement to put down roots in North America. Following World War II, it also attracted a large number of beat poets whose writing brought greater attention to Zen Buddhism to a wider group of Americans. Later, other notable authors also will write about and discuss the value of Zen Buddhism. D.T. Suzuki in 1951 returned to America from Japan and taught at Columbia and gave a number of lectures on Zen Buddhism there. Culturally significant to these lectures, both Jack Kerouac and Allen Greensberg attended these lectures. Suzuki was an important figure in the founding of the Zen Studies Society in 1956, and then in 1957, the Cambridge, Massachusetts Cambridge Buddhist Association. Tibetan Buddhism also came to America through the life and work of an individual, this one Tenzin Gyatso, the current Dalai Lama. He visited America first in 1979. As a result of this, increased attention was shown on the plight of those living in Tibet, and he has remained a significant draw for many American converts to all types of Buddhism, but significantly to its Tibetan form. Hinduism came to America in two different ways. First, it came in the form of Neo-Hinduism. Neo-Hinduism is a movement that envisions Hinduism as a more universal faith, similar to others, as opposed to a more conservative understanding of Hinduism, where Hinduism is dependent upon your caste or your birth to determine your dharma or your duty. Being more universal in scope, Neo-Hinduism found inroads in the Theosophical Society, especially after Madame Blavatsky's death and the Society's new leadership of Mrs. Anne Besant, who replaced Buddhist doctrines with Hindu ones. The Vedanta Society also emerged following the teachings of Swami Vivekananda. This was founded in 1894. Later, in 1920, Swami Yogananda moved to the United States and established the Yoganta Sat Sangha, or the Self-Realization Fellowship. Here, Yogananda taught yoga as both a spiritual and physical practice. The Boston Unitarian Church actually brought the earliest Hindu teachers to the United States. The first was Pratap Chandra Mazumdar, who in 1883 gave a lecture in the living room of Ralph Waldo Emerson. While Buddhism was able to slowly survive the restrictive immigration laws passed in the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, Hinduism was affected to a greater extent. It wasn't until 1965, when the exclusionary laws were dropped, that we start to see large waves of Hindus coming into America. This opened the door for Swami Bhaktivedanta. Swami Bhaktivedanta founded ISKCON, or the International Society of Krishna Consciousness, commonly just referred to as the Hare Krishna movement. The Krishnas are a monotheistic, syncretic Hindu movement. The devotees would regularly chant God's name, which they associated with Krishna, and a mantra stating Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Thus, the common name for them being Hare Krishnas, hearing this from outsiders. Typically, the men had a shaven head and would wear a saffron-colored robe, while women might wear a sari. In the late 1960s, they were also known for standing on street corners, handing out flowers, or playing cymbals in hopes of gaining attention as well as monetary support for their new lifestyle. They also practice a form of bhakti or devotional yoga in their homes and consist of a large number of converts and not just people from Indian descent. Other guru-based Hindu movements came to America in the 60s, including 1968, those following the Guru Maharishi. In 1968, he is pictured on the cover of popular magazines and addressed celebrities, including the Beatles, the Stones, as well as a growing movement. About 15,000 people formed around his spiritual regeneration movement. The movement prescribed a sort of cosmic consciousness and 2 30-minute sessions of transcendental meditation a day. While these movements captivated a large number of Americans, a good number of Hindus simply arrived through immigration from India or England in the later half of the 20th century, and even more so have arrived in the 21st century. At the beginning of the 20th century, another wave of immigrants from India brought their religion with them. These are the Sikhs, who largely come from the Punjab region of India, where they sought a better economic future in America than what existed in India under the British. They first settled in California, where many of them were farmhands. In 1912, there were enough Sikhs to establish their first temple or gurdwara in Stockton, California. The largest population of American Sikhs was about 3 hours north of Stockton, though, found in Yuba City. The Sikhs in Yuba City are so numerous that they are actually, numerically, the second largest religious body after various forms of Christianity. Sacramento also has a large number of Sikhs and is home to 7 gurdwaras. As the 20th century advanced, more Sikhs spread out across the United States beyond just California and the West Coast. Sikhs continue to arrive in different migratory waves from India. Following British rule, many left India, and another wave followed after immigration restrictions from Asia were lifted. The most recent wave of immigrants to America from the Punjab happened after the tragic events of Operation Blue Star in 1984, which saw the Indian government attacking the Sikhs' most holy temple. The backlash resulted also in the Sikh bodyguards of Indira Gandhi assassinating her, and a large number of Sikhs trying to find refuge outside of India. Sikhs can often be recognized by their turban and beard, which did cause some confusion following 9/11, where anti-Muslim violence resulted actually in the death of a Sikh, Balbir Singh Sodhi. Sikhs are also known for their vegetarianism and hospitality. They have what's known as a langar, or a communal kitchen, attached to their temples. And in these kitchens, Sikhs will serve as a symbol of their belief in equality as well as opportunity all who show up. This is also serves as generally a good opportunity for interfaith dialogue, which many Sikhs are willing to engage in. Today, many Sikhs serve in a number of professions, including agriculture and, quite notably, a good number in truck driving. Most Muslims came to America in the 20th century, but not all by any account. One prominent example is Omar ibn Said, who was a Senegalese slave born in 1770 before being brought to America. Many slaves from Senegal, Malay, Guinea, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Benin, and Nigeria were Muslims, though, along with the other restrictions inherent to the notion of slavery, their freedom of religion was minimized, to say the very least. They weren't allowed to openly worship or to set up and build mosques for their life and worship, or even, many cases, be able to read or own texts. Estimates will say that as high as 1/13 of all African slaves taken during the slave trade and brought to the Americas may have been Muslim. Islam, for many of the founding fathers, was an exotic belief that they had a passing familiarity with. We see in the writings of many Americans in the late 18th and early 19th century a mixture of both admiration and agitation towards Islam. Most of the agitation we see being made manifest in the Pirates of Tripoli and the concerns that it had on American economic trade. Although there was not any mosques in America set up early, there are accounts, including one from an escaped slave, Charles Ball, who in 1837's biography mentions his encounter with Mohammedans who prayed aloud 5 times a day in a language no one else understood. Following the Civil War, a wave of Syrian and Lebanese immigrants came to America. While many of these were Orthodox Christians, a sizable number of these were Muslims as well. The first mosque built in the United States was in 1915. Many more were constructed through the 30s and 40s, primarily in the upper Midwest and wherever a sizable Muslim population resided. In 1934, the quote, Mother Mosque of America was built in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and is the oldest mosque still in use today. Many Muslims found work for the Ford Motor Company and in the plants. As a result, many of them will live in Dearborn, Michigan, and the surrounding areas. This is today one of the largest centers of Islam. Similarly, a large number of Somali Muslims reside in Minnesota. In 1952, there were over 1,000 mosques in North America, many of which were also in Canada. In the 1960s, more Muslim immigrants came from not only the Middle East, but also from Southeast Asia, and by the turn of the century, there were an estimated 2,000 mosques in America. Further waves of Muslim immigrants came to America following the U.S. war on Serbia in the 1990s, where a number of Bosnians were given refugee status in America and were brought over and settled in the country. Additional immigration continued from the Middle East after 9/11. The events of 9/11 and subsequent wars on terror demonstrates America's continued ambivalent relationship with Islam, where, and many Americans are both intrigued, and indeed many do convert to Islam, but also other Americans hold reservations about Muslims in general and their place in American life. Baha'i is another movement which came to America in 1893, and more so with the arrival of Abdu'l-Baha in 1912. Many of the teachings of Baha'i are similar to the Theosophical Society or other syncretic movements. Their scriptures include the Bible, the Quran, and the writings of their three key founding figures, the Bab, Baha'u'llah, and Abdu'l-Baha. Baha'is belief is in the purpose of life is to acquire spiritual virtues, and the best way to do that is to follow God's teachings and laws. As such, these laws are found within not only the writings of their three figures, but within Islam and Christianity, and even many Eastern beliefs as well. The movement emerged in Persia around 1844 when Mizrahi al-Muhammad claimed to be the one that would herald the oncoming messenger. He became known as the Bab, or the Gate. The Bab is the forerunner of Bahula. Bahula means the glory of God and is the title given to Mirza Hussein Ali, who announced that he was the one that the Bab was talking about in 1863. As a result of this declaration, he suffered persecution, including imprisonment for 40 years. His eldest son, Abbas Effendi, known as Abdul Baha, or the servant of Baha, became the next successor of the movement. Officially, Baha'i will tell you that they do not proselytize, but they do a large amount of outreach nonetheless, which serves, practically speaking, in America and elsewhere as a form of proselytization. Their other teachings are also focused on the oneness of God, the oneness of religion, and the oneness of all peoples. Today they are governed by the Universal House of Justice, as well as a national spiritual assemblies that then report to the Universal House of Justice. Their American headquarters is in Evanston, Illinois, outside of Chicago. Their temple is often recognized as one of the most beautiful buildings in the Chicagoland area, and indeed, Baha'i temples, wherever they're found, are usually noted for their beauty. The Theosophical Society, as well as a growing interest with non-European religious traditions, gave rise to what's identified as the New Age movement. To start with, we need to point out that it is not new. The term was actually used in 1881 by John Ballou Newborough, a New York spiritualist who used various techniques of channeling spirits. He then published these in a manuscript called Osif, or a New Age Bible. The term New Age was also very common in the Theosophical Society, which emerged during the Gilded Age. Indeed, many of the notions we today associate with New Age religion we see already in the existence in one form or another in the Theosophical Society, or with the New Thought movement and the mental medicine that we talked about, which existed over a century beforehand. Notions of channeling spirits is also a practice that goes back thousands of years and is in no way new. Neither is the syncretism of various beliefs and practices that are used by New Age practitioners. What became new about the New Age actually happened after World War II, primarily with the connection of the now New Age movement with notions of space exploration. In the 1950s, we have flying space saucer cults become very popular within New Age, and a sort of mix that exists wherein the New Age are now referring to aliens as our brothers from outer space. And this revealed themselves in a different sort of light. Channeling became a sort of practice now of communicating not only with spirits, but with also beings from other planets. In the 1980s, New Age also had a higher media attention as different celebrities promoted channelers on TV and infomercials, similarly to those produced by evangelicals. New Age is really a loosely organized term which addresses various notions of Eastern belief, occultism, and vague notions of spirituality, including astrology, spiritualism, psychic prediction, astral projection, reincarnation, and new thought. Not every New Ager affirms each of these practices either. There is not a head of New Age or any sort of confirmed ecclesial body. Rather, it follows different gurus, teachers, channelers, and other leaders with a different title that they might ascribe to themselves. One of the more controversial aspects of New Age is the use of psychedelic and other mind-blowing, consciousness-expanding drugs. Some see the use of these drugs as a way to connect with the spiritual forces which permeate everyday life, while others resist this as an ill-suited or an ill-advised venture. Tension concerning the use of illicit drugs in religion is not anything new. Various religious traditions either prescribe or prohibit various drugs. For example, Buddhism, Sikhism, and Islam all prohibit the use of any intoxicants whatsoever. This doesn't mean that every devotee is as devout and follows through on this, but this is the prescription of the religion. Hindu priests also used to regularly take a drug known as soma before it eventually disappeared sometime around 500 BC. We knew that it had a sort of psychedelic effect from their writings and how they describe its use, but we don't know much more beyond that. Rastafarians make regular use of ganja in their religious rites, and Christians use wine in their central religious act. With all of this said, the most contentious debate in recent years surrounding the use of any sort of drug in religion is concerned with the notion of peyote as an expression of the religious freedom of various Native American groups who use the psychedelic cactus in their religious rituals. In some ways, this is an older practice. We actually can see this testified by Roman Catholic missionaries when they noted and condemned the practice when they encountered it in northern Mexico and southern Texas in their use of healing ceremonies, divinization, and other visionary practices amongst the natives there. When many of these natives converted over to Catholicism, the use seemed to die away. It made a resurgence, though, amongst the Plain Indians in the western United States after 1900, now being connected with the Eucharist itself. Lobbying efforts were made to suppress the use of peyote in the early 20th century, alongside similar efforts to prohibit the use of alcohol. Anthropologist James Mooney aided in the natives by identifying peyote religion as a denomination of Christianity and therefore preserving the practice as a morally acceptable act within the Native American Church, which also advocated for temperance concerning alcohol consumption. In 1934, John Collier, the commissioner of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, stated that, quote, no interference with Indian religious life or ceremonial expression will hereafter be tolerated. The fullest constitutional liberty in all matters affecting religion, conscience, and culture is instead insisted upon, for all Indians. The result was that roughly a quarter of Native Americans joined the Native American Church. This was challenged again in the 1960s, in part because of the use of the psychedelic drugs and the new laws being formed to counteract that usage. In 1962, 3 Navajo Indians were arrested in California for using peyote. The result was that eventually the California Supreme Court heard the case and found in the favor of the Navajos in 1964, noting that the theology of the Native American Church, quote, combines certain Christian teachings with the belief that peyote embodies the Holy Spirit, that those who partake of peyote enter into direct communion with God, end quote. In 1978, the U.S. Congress legitimized the practice with the passing of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. One key figure in the early use of peyote religion is Quanah Parker. Parker was the son of a Comanche chief and a European American woman who was kidnapped as a child and raised by the Comanche. Parker refused the Treaty of the Medicine Lodge of 1867, which stipulated that the Comanche would accept reservation life. Parker formed alliances with the Cheyenne and tried to maintain independence, but eventually his rebellion against the United States ended, and he was forced to settle on the Quawa Comanche Reservation in 1875. Parker eventually tried to strike a balance between native life and the growing presence of the United States culture. He accepted some notions of Christianity, but not monogamous marriages. Surprisingly, it was his attempt to connect with his white relatives that actually introduced him to the use of peyote. Visiting his uncle in Mexico, he had a problem with his stomach and was given peyote in the mid-1880s. He was then cured of the problem and accredited peyote to the cause. He instituted what's known as the half-moon ceremony. Today, it's known as the Old Way. The half-moon ceremony took its name from the shape of the altar on which the peyote rested during the ritual. Many of the prayers associated with it are a blend of native tobacco prayers and Christian prayers, including prayers to Christ and the use of the Bible. Eventually, the aid of Mooney and Parker created the Native American Church to prevent a national effort to ban peyote. The founders of the Native American Church had accepted many Christian notions, mostly Protestant versions, including devotion to Christ and Christian morality defined by sobriety, industry, and honest living, though it added to this the use of peyote alongside the Eucharist for the central religious acts. Eastern Orthodox Christians saw growth from slightly over 100,000 people in 1900 to more than 2.6 million in 1960. So much that a campaign was started to call Eastern Orthodox Christians the fourth religion in America. There were many statements that went out on both legal and other works calling America Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, and Orthodox. In the 1960s, it was stated that there were more than 6 million Orthodox Christians, but these numbers were inflated, including all immigrants from Orthodox countries. Such an exaggeration, or extrapolation if you'd prefer, was not unique to the Orthodox in the 1960s. Rather, we see this amongst the Jews, the Muslims, and the Buddhists as well, who often, in part because the exact number of how many immigrants came over and how large their actual religious body was in America was unknown, would use U.S. immigration numbers to help fill in the gaps. Oftentimes, this included for all Orthodox Jews, Christians, Muslims, and Catholics as well, numbers that didn't show up in pews or into church buildings at this point either. What it did, though, for the Orthodox Christians in the mid-20th century was to adjust discussion about orthodoxy and its place in America. The main reason for the growth of orthodoxy in America in the 20th century was the same reason for Buddhism and Islam and a whole host of other religions, and that's immigration. Similar to other religious bodies, people moved to America and brought their religion with them. There were massive waves of immigrants from Russia, Greece, Serbia, Syria, and Lebanon. The Greeks came over in the 1960s, and the Greek Orthodox Church of America estimated to have about 1.5 million members in 1962. The Russians reported about half of that number, and the Arabs and the Serbs were less than the Russians. By 1969, reports of about 4% growth added to these numbers. With this said, until very recently, there were more Orthodox Arabs in America than Muslim Arabs. In fact, one could even see that that might be true today, although those numbers are much more at parity. The Greeks, being the largest numerically, also had a huge impact in shaping 20th century American civil life. Archbishop Athenagoras helped untangle many of the legal knots concerning the Orthodox Church and their relation with their countries of origins. He served as a Greek Archbishop of America beginning in 1930 and founded Holy Cross School of Theology in Brookline, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston. In 1948, he was elected to the Ecumenical Patriarchate and was flown to Constantinople on the presidential plane of President Truman, what would later become known as Air Force One. This shows immediately the sort of connection that already existed and was formed with the Greek Orthodox Church and political apparatus in America. His American successor was Archbishop Michael Constantides, who was the first Orthodox bishop to participate in a presidential inauguration, in the inauguration of Dwight D. Eisenhower. It was also under his tenure that petitions were made all over the country to recognize Orthodoxy as the fourth faith of America. Surprising to many of us today, this was actually a legal issue and was used to ensure rights were granted to Orthodox citizens, both in the military as well as states, and also basically just certain issues with dealing with cemeteries and sorts of plots and lands and histories and recognizing places as on historical landmarks. Constantides was succeeded by Archbishop Iakovos. Iakovos is probably best known within the American culture for walking with MLK during the Civil Rights Movement. He is the one pictured on the Time magazine cover with MLK. Later, President Carter gave him the Presidential Medal of Freedom on June 9, 1980. A key figure in American Orthodoxy in the 20th century is Seraphim Rose. He was born Eugene Dennis Rose in 1934. He is sometimes also referred to as Seraphim of Platina. Seraphim was an American monk of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, who co-founded the St. Herman of Alaska Monastery in Platina, California. He was born in San Diego and demonstrates a sort of new wave of Orthodox in America beginning in the mid-20th century and continuing to this day. Rose was baptized Methodist, but rejected Christianity in high school. He then began to study Chinese philosophy at Pomona College, where he graduated magna cum laude in 1956. That same year, he came out as gay and was in a fairly serious relationship with a man by the name of John Gregerson. Rose then got a master's degree in Oriental Languages at the University of California, Berkeley, where he graduated in 1961 with his thesis entitled Emptiness and Fullness in the Lao Tzu. His interest was in understanding the deeper religious truths found in Chinese religion, but due to a brief interest in early Christianity by Rose was exposed to Orthodox Christianity. Rose's interest continued to grow, and eventually he parted ways with John in 1962 and converted to Orthodox Christianity, later stating in his biography about the period prior to his conversion, quote, "I was in hell. I know what hell is." Rose became a disciple of the Bishop of San Francisco, John Maximovich, today known as Saint John of Shanghai and San Francisco. Rose then sought permission to start up a periodical, which he was given a blessing to do so by St. John. Surrounding the publication grew a community known as the St. Herman of Alaska Brotherhood. In 1968, Rose and those with him founded a monastery in Platina, which is in Northern California, and named it after St. Herman. In 1970, Rose took the name Seraphim after Saint Seraphim of Sarov, a 19th century Russian saint, and began studying for the priesthood. He was ordained a priest in 1977. He continued to study and write and publish over these years, where he engaged with philosophy and the intersection of American and Russian religious life. Many of his writings concern a philosophical conception of nihilism and what happens after death, as well as what the future of religion would look like, himself identifying it as Orthodox. Additionally, he and those with him translated and wrote on many of the lives of the saints, including the Theotokos, Augustine, and St. Simeon the New Theologian. Rose reposed in 1982, and a process of canonization has begun, with the country of Georgia actually recognizing him as a saint in 2024, in part because of the value that his works had in ending communism in that country. Another significant event for the life of Orthodox Christianity took place in 1987. Beginning that year, a group of evangelical Christians known as the Evangelical Orthodox Church began to enter into the Orthodox Church. The EOC began in the 1960s as a part of the Campus Crusades for Christ. They sought to reach back to the roots of Christianity and incorporate many earlier practices into their weekly worship, which had been lost by modern evangelicalism according to their estimation. They reinstituted an ecclesial structure, now having bishops. They have iconography and liturgical forms of worship, including adopting, in some of them, the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. In the mid-80s, one of their bishops, a man by the name of Peter Gilchrist, sought to become Orthodox instead of simply adding Orthodox elements into his church life. He and others approached various Orthodox bishops and eventually found an audience with Bishop Antune of the Antiochian Orthodox Church in America. Then, with the blessing and working alongside of Metropolitan Philip, most of the EOC joined the Orthodox Church. As the EOC was spread throughout the United States, conversion of the process of EOC churches to Orthodox churches had a series of goings and blessings and discussions and negotiations. The first one happened in LA, but over the next several weeks, whole congregations became Orthodox in the United States, moving from Santa Cruz to Nashville to Jackson and Memphis, Gary, Indiana, Anchorage, Seattle, and several parishes in Canada as well. Most of the priests who were received into the church were ordained as Orthodox priests, and the churches adopted the Liturgy of Chrysostom if they had not already been familiar with it prior to this, though many of them, again, had already seen this as a sort of continued practice of the EOC. The effect of this was not only upon those former evangelical churches, but upon the Antiochian Church in America as well, and broadly on all Orthodox in America, as by the late 80s there were a large number of Orthodox who had no ethnic tie to an Orthodox country. They weren't Russian, they weren't Serbian, they weren't Greek, they weren't from Syria or Lebanon. Services grew to be more and more in English, and the door at this point was opened for more converts to Orthodoxy without the feeling that it was merely an ethnic club. In fact, many Orthodox churches today, the ethnic tie or language is a sort of minor note compared to the English major note that's being pronounced. The EOC still does remain today, though at a rather diminished size given the fact that the majority joined the Orthodox Church in the late 80s. Black churches also changed in the 20th century. While a good number of African Americans joined the Pentecostal Church following Seymour, not everyone did. A new change emerged in 1964 when Joseph R. Washington Jr. published Black Religion, the Negro and Christianity in the United States. Washington criticized black religion as, quote, folk religion. He said that it lacked the theological sophistication that classical Christian theology had. Later, James Cone provided some of that sophistication with his use of liberation theology and his work, A Black Theology of Liberation, published in 1970. Liberation theology emerged in South America following the work of Peruvian Dominican priest Gustavo Gutierrez. Gutierrez sought to address the economic hardships of South America and provide a response to the powerlessness that many of his parishioners felt with a call of liberation. Gutierrez is often criticized as abandoning the world to come from a Catholic version of a Marxist utopia. While not Catholic, Cone saw a similar need to address the powerlessness of Black Americans. Cone united biblical themes to the American Black experience, primarily the notions of bondage of the Hebrews in Egypt and bondage under other political powers in America. Cone also advocated the notion of Jesus as the Black Christ. Liberation meant liberation of the Black mind, beliefs, and attitudes. Quote, Black theology must say, if the doctrine is compatible with or enhances the drive for Black freedom, then it is the gospel of Jesus Christ. If the doctrine is against or indifferent to the essence of Blackness, as expressed in Black power, then it is the work of the Antichrist. End quote. The National Committee of Black Churchmen declared in 1969, quote, the demands that Christ the Liberator impose upon all men requires all blacks to affirm their full dignity as persons and all whites to surrender their presuppositions of superiority and abuses of power. There also emerged a theology of hope and reconciliation with those around them, while maintaining a Black awareness and a value in being Black. The late 20th century also saw a rise of various new American religious movements. The theme of most of these was to find a new way to heaven or a new perception of heaven. Some of these movements grew out of the social unrest seeking a new harmonious relationship of the races as a result of the civil rights movement. Others grew from the drug culture of the 60s and sought a new religious mind through psychedelics and other drugs, though not being classified broadly as New Age. New prophets also emerged, starting their own spin on religion, including the fiction writing and founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, who promised to be, quote, the bridge to total freedom and total power. Jim Jones was also an activist for racial equality and worked along the poor and started the People's Temple before moving to South America and the tragedy that was then exposed at Jonestown. The Unification Church, or Moonies, were another group that emerged in the post-war period and grew to prominence in America over the next 40 years. They were followers of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon and properly identified as the Unification Church, but commonly are referred to as the Moonies. Moon, a Korean, founded his Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity in 1954. Moon himself was the new Messiah for Korea, who, he said, was commissioned by Jesus on a Korean mountainside to be this Messiah and to restore Korea and, presumably later, the rest of the world. The church was a mix of messianism and anti-communism. Moon became rather wealthy from his growing ties with the Korean government, and in 1973 he shifted his primary base from Korea to the United States. Like other Pentecostal revivalists, Moon preached the doom of America following the crime, alcoholism, drug abuse, college radicals, and communists which existed in America in spades in the 70s. His purpose was to restore the American dream. Moon gave out new prescriptions for the American life, including a return to what he called traditionalism. As such, he had mass weddings. This becomes one of the more key features of the Moonies that is usually seen in pop culture, where hundreds or even thousands of people would be married at a single time. Moon's message found home with many former hippies who had grown tired of Haight-Ashbury but wanted a new approach to religion. While many anti-establishment types joined the Moonies, Moon's church was its own form of new establishment. As the new Messiah, his words were to be accepted and followed unquestionably as divine words. He found great success at recruiting college students, as well as proclaiming them and giving them an offer of hope that America could not do in the 70s and 80s. Moon was called by his followers Father, and his command was, quote, what I wish must be your wish. In 1982, Moon was convicted of tax evasion, and his movement took a big hit, being identified as many from the outside as a cult. Surprisingly, the movement re-emerged in the 90s, and in 1994, Moon launched an International Federation for World Peace, which took the place of many of the church's operations. The movement took another hit when Moon's own daughter wrote an expose about the movement in 1998. Moon died in 2012. The Unification Church still exists to this day and emphasizes prayer, mental health, and the unity of humanity, and does not like being called a cult. The future of American religious life is something that is unknown. The country, by all measurable statistics, today is far more religious than it was in 1776, but less than it was in 1960. Also, what is known about religion and knowledge of religion varies quite a bit from what the average person in 1776 would have been able to mention about a faith that may or may not have been theirs, to what people would say today. Religious knowledge overall has decreased considerably. But what religion is also varies. America was once dominated by Protestantism, therefore knowing what you believe was something that was easier to navigate and discuss. Today, Christianity remains the dominant religious expression of the Americas, but it has found a plurality of voices, including Catholic and Eastern Orthodox ones, as well as a whole new host of Protestant denominations that either came to America or, in many cases, emerged out of American religious experience. The description of American religious life from the mid 20th century forward was Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, and Orthodox. It's quite possible that in the next few decades, a few more traditions will be added to this description of the religious bodies that make up America and the dominant strands that are there. Depending on which town or locale you might be in, this might have already happened. As we pointed out, Islam is dominant in Michigan and Minnesota, and Sikhs happen to be dominant in Central California. So, what the future of American religious life looks like is not anything anyone knows. Everyone's got their estimation, and many people have their hopes and dreams. There could be discussions of the nones continuing to arise, but that number, at least as of 2024, seems to be abating and being reduced. It's quite possible that it's just a temporary lull, or that new forms of religious expression will also be made manifest going forward. The future is still unwritten, and religion is still going to be important, at least to some degree, on how people will look about what is the future of religion.